A low, consistent note, the only sound in a room that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. It was a sterile silence, the kind that settled into the bones and made the heartbeat feel too loud. He loosened the knot of his silk tie, the fabric slipping slightly against his collar. But the gesture brought no relief. The constriction he felt was not around his neck. It was wrapped tightly around his chest, a weight that had been growing heavier with each passing year. Invisible to the outside world, but crushing to the man who lived inside it. His office was a monument to achievement. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine, every piece of furniture selected by top designers to convey power, stability, and absolute control. The desk was a slab of obsidian, cold to the touch, devoid of personal photographs or trivial mementos. There were no pictures of family, no souvenirs from travels, no evidence of a life lived outside of these walls. There were only awards, plaques, and contracts, stacked neatly like tombstones marking the graves of his time. Julian ran a hand over the smooth surface, feeling the chill seep into his palm. He had built this empire brick by brick, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice. He had told himself that this was the goal, that the view from the top would justify the climb. But now, standing here in the quietude of the night, the view felt hollow. The lights below belonged to strangers living lives that seemed vibrant and connected, while he stood above them all, isolated in a cage of his own making. He turned away from the window, the movement slow and deliberate, as if gravity held him down more strongly than it did others. Walking across the thick carpet, he stopped by the sideboard where a crystal decanter sat half full. He did not pour a drink. He simply looked at the amber liquid, catching the light from the city outside. It was a prop, something to hold during meetings, something to offer guests. But tonight he had no guests. He never had guests. The isolation was a choice he had made long ago, or so he told himself. He had convinced everyone, including his own heart, that relationships were distractions, that love was a variable too unpredictable for a man who dealt in certainties. But the certainty he had achieved now felt like a prison. The silence of the room pressed against his ears, amplifying the thoughts he usually kept buried under spreadsheets and board meetings. Julian walked back to the desk and sat in the high-backed leather chair. It molded to his shape, expensive and comfortable, yet it offered no warmth. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the obsidian surface, and buried his face in his hands for a moment. The scent of the leather was rich, but it smelled of nothing human. He closed his eyes and tried to summon a memory of warmth, a moment of genuine connection, but his mind kept returning to the cold logic of business. When he thought of the past, the images were blurry, faded like old photographs left in the sun. There was a face there, somewhere in the recesses of his mind, a woman who had once looked at him with hope instead of Jingwei, awe. He pushed the thought away quickly, a reflex honed over years of suppression. To think of her was to acknowledge the cost, and he could not afford to look at the bill tonight. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking time that he could never get back. 1 o'clock in the morning. The cleaning crew had finished hours ago. The security guards were doing their rounds on the lower floors. He was entirely alone in the building, the king of an empty castle. He opened his eyes and looked at the stack of magazines on the corner of his desk, business journals and industry reports that required his attention before the morning meeting. His gaze drifted over them without focus until something caught the edge of his vision. A glossy cover, slightly different from the rest, slipped from the pile and landed face up on the dark wood. He frowned, reaching out to straighten the pile, but his hand paused. The magazine was not one of his usual subscriptions. It was a lifestyle publication, something focused on society and human interest, usually relegated to the waiting room. How it had ended up on his desk was a mystery, perhaps left by an assistant who thought he might find a relevant article inside. Julian picked it up, the paper heavy and smooth under his fingers. He intended to toss it into the recycling bin without a second thought, but the headline stopped him. It was not about stocks or mergers. It was about resilience, about rebuilding, about a woman who had started from nothing and created an empire of her own. The text was bold, promising a story of triumph against the odds. Julian felt a strange ripple go through him, a sensation akin to static electricity before a storm. He told himself it was curiosity, professional interest in a competitor or a success story, but deep down, a tremor of something else moved through him. He turned the page, the sound crisp in the quiet room. The article was accompanied by photographs, high-quality images that captured not just wealth but life. There were pictures of her estate, lush and green, filled with light and laughter. It was a kind of luxury that money could buy, but the atmosphere in the photos suggested something money could not create: warmth. Julian's eyes scanned the text, reading about the woman's journey, the challenges she had faced, the years of struggle that had forged her strength. The words seemed to resonate in the empty office, highlighting everything that was missing in his own narrative. He had taken the easy path to wealth, leveraging existing capital and connections. She had walked through fire to get where she was. There was a dignity in her story that made his own achievements feel shallow, like paper masks worn by a child. He turned another page, his heart beating slightly faster, though he could not explain why. The next photograph was larger, a centerpiece for the article. It showed the woman standing on a terrace, the sun setting behind her, casting a golden glow over her face. She looked different than the memory he kept locked away. She looked older, yes, but also more vibrant, more real. Her eyes held a confidence that he had never seen before, a steadiness that suggested she no longer needed anyone to validate her existence. Julian felt a tightness in his throat. He knew those eyes. He had seen them looking at him with love once, before he had turned away to answer a phone call, before he had chosen the office over the dinner table. The name under the photograph confirmed what his instinct was already screaming, a realization that hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was her, the woman he had left behind when he decided that success was more important than partnership. But it was not just her image that held him captive. Standing beside her, holding her hands, were two children. They were young, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, dressed in casual clothes that spoke of comfort and care. They were smiling, genuine smiles that reached their eyes, mirroring the woman's strength. Julian stared at the children, the air in the room seeming to vanish from his lungs. They had her eyes, but the shape of their faces, the curve of their chins, was unmistakably his. It was like looking into a mirror from 10 years ago, seeing a future he had never known existed. Twins. The word echoed in his mind, loud and deafening. He had never known. She had never told him. Or perhaps she had, and he had not been listening, too focused on the next deal, the next milestone, to hear the most important news of his life. The magazine slipped from his fingers, landing softly on the carpet. Julian stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that shattered the silence. He walked back to the window, but the city lights no longer looked like stars. They looked like accusations. Every light represented a home where families were together, where fathers knew their children, where husbands held their wives. He placed his hand against the cold glass, pressing hard, as if he could reach through it and touch the life he had abandoned. The emptiness he had felt moments ago was no longer just a vague sadness. It was a specific, sharp pain. He had thought he was alone by choice, but now he realized he was alone by consequence. He had built a wall to keep the world out, but he had locked himself in with nothing but his regrets. The suspense of the moment hung heavy in the air. What did this mean? Why was this magazine here now? Was it fate or just a cruel coincidence? Julian's mind raced with questions that had no immediate answers. He thought about the life they were living in those photos. The title of the article mentioned luxury, but it was a luxury earned through struggle, not inherited or won in a boardroom. She had done it without him. She had raised his children without him. The realization was humbling and devastating all at once. He had always believed that he was the provider, the one who secured the future. But looking at the evidence in front of him, he saw that he had been unnecessary. They had thrived in his absence. The thought stung more than any business failure ever could. He turned back to the room, looking at the empty space around him. The awards on the wall seemed to mock him now. What good was a trophy if there was no one to share the victory with? What good was wealth if it could not buy back the time he had lost? He walked to the door of his office, his hand hovering over the handle. He could leave, go home to his empty mansion, and try to sleep. Or he could do something else. He could follow the thread of this discovery. He could find out where she was living now if the article was current. The address of her company was listed in the sidebar. It was in a city several hours away, a place he had no business being in, a place he had avoided for years. Julian took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and stale ambition. He made a decision. He would not sleep tonight. He would not pretend that he had not seen the photos. The void in his chest had a name now, and it demanded to be addressed. He picked up the magazine again, treating it like a fragile artifact, and placed it carefully in his briefcase. He turned off the lights in the office, plunging the room into darkness, save for the glow of the city outside. As he walked toward the elevator, His steps were firmer than they had been in years. The loneliness was still there, but it was no longer passive. It had become a drive, a purpose. He was going to find her. He was going to see the truth with his own eyes. The night was young, and for the first time in a decade, Julian felt alive, terrified, and completely unsure of what would happen next. The elevator doors opened, swallowing him underground garage, where his car waited under the hum of fluorescent lights. It was a sleek, black sedan, armored and silent, a machine designed to keep the world out. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against his back, mirroring the chill that had settled in his office. For a moment, he simply sat there, the engine off, the magazine burning a hole in the briefcase on the passenger seat. The silence of the garage was heavy, pressing against the windows, but it was the silence inside his head that demanded attention. He started the engine, a low purr that vibrated through the chassis, and pulled out into the empty night streets. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then steady, streaking the windshield with blurred lines of gray and silver. The wipers moved back and forth, a rhythmic metronome counting down the seconds of a life he was only just beginning to understand. As the city lights smeared into abstract shapes of gold and red, Julian's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The familiar route toward the highway usually served as a decompression zone, a transition from work to home. But tonight there was no home to go to. There was only the road, and the memories that the rain seemed to wash up from the depths of his past. The scent of the car, leather and polished wood, suddenly shifted in his perception. For a fleeting second, it smelled like old coffee and lavender, the scent of a different life, a different apartment, a different version of himself. The highway stretched out before him, a ribbon of dark asphalt cutting through the night. The solitude of the drive pulled at the threads of his memory, unraveling a moment he had spent years trying to bury. It wasn't a violent memory. There were no shattered plates, no screaming matches, no slammed doors. Those things would have been easier to process, easier to categorize as conflict. Instead, it was a quiet erosion, a slow fading of color until everything was gray. He remembered the evening clearly, as if it were happening in the passenger seat beside him. It was 5 years ago, in the small apartment they had shared before his success had demanded larger spaces and colder walls. He could see Elena standing by the window of that old living room, the same way he had stood by his office window tonight. She was holding a box, a simple cardboard carton filled with books and framed photos. She wasn't crying. Her face was calm, composed, but her eyes held an exhaustion that went deeper than sleeplessness. It was the look of someone who had stopped hoping for a change that was never going to come. Julian remembered standing in the doorway, his phone buzzing in his pocket, the vibration against his hip feeling like a tether pulling him away from her. "Julian," she had said, her voice soft, barely rising above the sound of the rain outside that night too. "You don't have to come with me. I know you have the merger meeting tomorrow." He remembered his response, the words tasting like ash now, but seeming so logical then. "It's just for a few days, Elena. Once this closes, I'll have more time. We can go away. I promised you." She had turned then, looking at him not with anger, but with a profound sadness that pierced him even now. "It's not about the days, Julian. It's about the presence. You are here physically, but you are never here. You are always somewhere else, in the next deal, the next quarter, the next milestone. I married a man, but I live with a ghost." He had stepped forward, instinctively reaching for her, but stopped when he saw her flinch, not from fear, but from habit. She was used to him pulling away before contact could be made. "I am doing this for us," he had insisted, the justification feeling hollow even as he spoke it. "I want to give you everything. Security. Luxury. A life without worry." Elena had placed the box down on the table, the sound of cardboard on wood echoing in the quiet room. "I don't want a life without worry if it means a life without you. I want the struggle if it means we face it together. But you chose the struggle over me. You chose the building over the home." The memory shifted, sharpening. He remembered the silence that followed. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full of all the things they hadn't said over the years. The missed dinners, the canceled trips, the phone calls answered during quiet moments. He remembered wanting to argue, to tell her she didn't understand the pressure, the stakes. But looking at her face, he realized she understood perfectly. She understood that he valued the empire more than the empress. "I can't ask you to wait anymore," she had whispered, picking up the box again. "I love you, Julian, but I cannot love the space you leave behind. It's too cold." She had walked past him then, toward the door. He had stood there, hands still half raised, phone still buzzing in his pocket. He remembered looking at the phone, then at the door. For a fraction of a second, he had hesitated. But the habit of a lifetime was too strong. He had checked the screen. A message from his assistant, confirming the morning briefing. He had looked up and she was gone. The door clicked shut, a soft final sound that sealed his fate. He had told himself she would come back. He told himself that once the deal was done, he would fix it. But the deal led to another deal, and the fix was never made, until the silence became permanent. Back in the car, a tear traced a path down Julian's cheek, hot and sudden against the cool air of the cabin. He wiped it away angrily, ashamed of the vulnerability, but the emotion was a floodgate that had been breached. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the roof, masking the sound of his breathing. He realized now that he hadn't just abandoned a wife. He had abandoned the possibility of a family. He had assumed that providing financially was enough, that love was a transaction where money equaled care. But Elena had shown him, through her absence and now through this magazine, that care was presence. It was showing up. It was being there when the world was dark. The highway signs blurred past, marking the distance between his old life and the destination he was now chasing. Each mile felt like a penance. He thought about the twins in the photograph. They were 5 years old. That meant they were conceived around the time of the separation. Had she known then? Had she tried to tell him, and he had been too busy looking at his phone to hear? The guilt was a physical weight, pressing against his diaphragm, making it hard to breathe. He had robbed them of a father, not out of malice, but out of negligence. He had been so focused on building a legacy that he had forgotten to create one. The car's navigation system chimed softly, indicating a turn ahead. The voice was robotic, impersonal, guiding him toward a city where his past was waiting. Julian signaled and moved into the exit lane, the tires humming against the wet pavement. He needed to prepare himself. He couldn't just burst into their lives demanding answers. Elena had built a fortress of independence, and he was an outsider trying to breach the walls. He had to approach this not as the magnate who owned buildings, but as the man who had lost his way. He had to be humble. He glanced at the briefcase again. The magazine was there, the proof of everything he had missed. He wondered what Elena would feel when she saw him. Would she be angry? Would she be indifferent? Indifference scared him more than anger. Anger implied passion, a lingering connection. Indifference meant he was truly irrelevant. He tightened his jaw, setting his features into a mask of determination. He would not let indifference win. He had spent years building things that lasted, concrete and steel. Now he had to build something fragile and human. He had to rebuild trust. The city limits sign appeared in the headlights, welcoming him to a place he had avoided for half a decade. The skyline here was different, lower, warmer. There were no towering spires of glass dominating the view, just lights glowing from windows where people lived. Julian slowed the car, feeling the pulse of the town through the steering wheel. He wasn't just arriving at a location, he was arriving at a reckoning. The past was no longer a ghost in the rearview mirror. It was waiting in the flesh ahead. He took a deep breath, the air in the car feeling thinner now, charged with anticipation. He didn't know what he would say to her, or to the children. He only knew that he could not turn back. The silence of the office was behind him. The noise of life, messy and complicated and real, was just beginning. He drove deeper into the streets, the rain washing over the car like a baptism, preparing him for the confrontation that would define the rest of his life. The engine hummed, steady and strong, carrying him toward the truth, toward its own internal warmth. It was not the cold, reflective glass of the corporate towers Julian was used to, but a structure of brick and large windows that invited light rather than repelling it. A sign above the entrance read Elena Vance Designs, elegant and understated. This was it, the headquarters of the empire she had built without him. Julian put the car in park but left the engine running, the heat blasting against the chill that had seeped into his bones during the drive. He watched the entrance, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. He could not go in yet. He needed to know. The magazine photo was evidence, but it was public relations. He needed the raw truth, the legal and biological certainty that would anchor the storm raging inside him. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact labeled Marcus. Marcus was his fixer, the man who handled the things that required discretion and speed. It was early, too early for most people, but Marcus never slept when Julian called. Julian pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear, listening to the ring tone cut through the silence of the car. It rang once, twice, then clicked open. Mr. Thorne. Marcus's voice was crisp, professional, devoid of judgment. I saw the missed call from the road. Are you safe? I need something, Marcus, Julian said, his voice rough, barely recognizable to his own ears. I need you to dig into a record. Immediately. Public records, birth certificates, business filings. Everything available on Elena Vance in this city. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of keys clicking softly. Elena Vance. Your ex-wife. Sir, is this regarding the magazine article? Just do it, Julian snapped, the urgency bleeding through. I need to know about the children. Dates of birth. Parentage. And I need to know about her company. Funding sources. Investors. Everything. Understood, Marcus replied, the typing sounds becoming more frantic. Give me a moment. I'm accessing the county database now. Julian ended the call and set the phone on the dashboard, staring at the screen as if he could will the data to appear faster. He looked back at the building. A delivery truck was unloading boxes at the side entrance. A woman in a sharp blazer walked out, laughing with a security guard. She looked happy. She looked fulfilled. Julian felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it felt like physical pain. She had built a community here. He had built a fortress. The rain continued to fall, blurring the edges of the world outside, isolating him in this metal box with his thoughts. The phone buzzed. Julian grabbed it instantly. Marcus? I have the birth records, Marcus said, his tone shifting, becoming softer, more cautious. There are 2 children, male and female. Twins. Julian closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the headrest. Dates. Born 5 years ago, Marcus said. September 14th. The date hit Julian like a physical blow. He did the math instantly. 9 months prior to that date was the night Elena had left him. The night he had chosen the merger over the marriage. They were conceived in the final days of their union, a last spark of love before the coldness took over. She had carried them alone. She had given birth alone. And the father? Julian asked, though he already knew the answer, though he hoped against hope that somehow, miraculously, she had found someone else. Listed as unknown, Marcus said quietly. She did not put a name on the certificate. She protected their privacy. But legally, without a paternity test, you are not on the record. However, given the timeline, it's me, Julian whispered. They are mine. Yes, sir. It appears so. Julian swallowed hard, the lump in his throat refusing to go down. And the company? How did she fund it? Did she take money from the settlement? Did she ever try to contact me for support? There was a longer pause this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice held a note of admiration that stung Julian's pride. I'm looking at the business filings now. The company was started 3 years ago. Initial capital came from a small business grant and a personal loan. There are no records of any transfers from your accounts, sir. No alimony claims. No child support requests. She signed a waiver in the divorce settlement relinquishing all claims to your assets. Julian lowered the phone, staring at the dashboard. She had let him go completely. She had taken nothing. She could have fought for half of what he had now. She could have demanded support for the children. Instead, she had chosen struggle over his money. She had chosen dignity over dependency. The realization dismantled the last of his defenses. He had always told himself that she stayed away because she was proud, but he had assumed she struggled. He hadn't realized she had succeeded despite him, not because of him. Marcus, Julian said, his voice breaking slightly. She did all of this. Alone. It appears so, sir, Marcus replied. There are no other partners listed. She is the sole owner. The credit history shows years of maxed out cards in the beginning, paid off slowly. It was difficult, but she did it. Julian ended the call without saying goodbye. He couldn't speak anymore. The silence in the car was no longer empty. It was heavy with the weight of her sacrifice. He looked at the building again, seeing it differently now. It wasn't just a successful business. It was a monument to her resilience. Every brick, every window, represented a night she had stayed awake working while he slept in silk sheets. Every employee she hired was a testament to her belief in people, something he had lost long ago. He stepped out of the car. The rain hit his face, cold and cleansing. He didn't put up his umbrella. He deserved the cold. He walked toward the building, not to the main entrance, but to the side where the delivery was happening. He needed to hear it from someone else. He needed to know how she was perceived here. A young man was stacking boxes near the door, wiping rain from his forehead. He looked up as Julian approached, recognizing the expensive suit but not the man. "Can I help you?" "Delivery entrance is around back." "I'm not here for delivery," Julian said, keeping his voice low. "I'm an investor, looking into the company's background." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The young man smiled, a genuine, bright smile. "You're looking into Elena's company? You won't find a better investment. She pays us above market rate. She knows everyone's name. She brought donuts last week when my kid was sick." Julian felt a tear mix with the rain on his cheek. "She sounds remarkable." "She is," the young man said, picking up another box. "She built this place from nothing. People say she had a rough past, but you'd never know it. She's all about the future here, especially for those kids of hers. They come here sometimes after school. You should see them. They're brilliant, just like her." The mention of the children broke something inside Julian. They came here. They were part of this world he was standing on the edge of. Do they ask about their father?" The young man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a protective caution. "Not that I've heard. Mrs. Vance doesn't talk about him. She says he's busy building things elsewhere. She teaches them that everyone has their own path." Julian nodded, unable to speak. Busy building things elsewhere. The euphemism for abandonment. She had spun his neglect into a lesson for them, protecting them from the bitterness of rejection. She had turned his absence into a neutral fact rather than a wound. The magnitude of her grace overwhelmed him. He had expected anger. He had prepared for defensiveness. He was not prepared for this level of forgiveness she had granted him without even knowing he was standing there. "Thank you," Julian managed to say. "You've been very helpful." He turned and walked back to the car, his steps heavy. The investigation was complete. The facts were confirmed. The twins were his. The success was hers. The time lost was immeasurable. He sat back in the driver's seat, the leather now feeling like a judge's bench. He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had signed contracts worth millions. But he had never signed anything as important as being a father. He started the engine again, but he didn't drive away. He watched the main door of the building. He saw a car pull up. A woman stepped out. Even from this distance, he knew it was her. She moved with a purpose that was entirely her own. She was shielding two small figures from the rain with a large umbrella, her body angled to keep them dry while her own shoulder got wet. Julian watched them walk into the building, a unit of 3. A family. He had the confirmation he needed. He knew the truth. But knowing the truth and fixing it were two different things. He could drive away now. He could leave them to their peace. He could remain the ghost she told her children about. Or he could walk through that door. The suspense of the choice hung in the air, thicker than the rain. He looked at the magazine in the passenger seat, then at the door where they had disappeared. The investigation had given him the data, but it had also given him the stakes. If he walked in there, he risked disrupting the harmony she had created. If he stayed away, he condemned himself to a lifetime of knowing he was close but never touching. He turned off the engine. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence before a decision that changes everything. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, older than he had this morning. But there was something else in his eyes now. Not just regret, but resolve. He had spent a lifetime acquiring things. Now he had to learn how to deserve something. He opened the car door. The rain was still falling, but he didn't care. He stepped out onto the pavement, leaving the safety of the car behind. He walked toward the entrance, not as a tycoon, not as an investor, but as a man coming home to a place he had never truly left in his heart. The door handle was cold under his precipice of 2 different lives. On one side of the threshold was the man he had become, wealthy, powerful, and utterly alone. On the other side was the man he had left behind, and the family that had grown in the shadow of his absence. He pushed. The door swung open silently, well-oiled and welcoming, revealing a lobby that breathed life in a way his own corporate towers never did. Stepping inside, Julian was immediately struck by the warmth. It wasn't just the heating system, it was the atmosphere. The air smelled of fresh coffee, paper, and something floral, perhaps lavender, a scent that tugged violently at a memory he had tried to suppress. The walls were not bare glass or sterile white paint. They were adorned with colors, sketches, and fabrics pinned up in organized chaos. It was a space of creation, not just administration. His own offices were designed to intimidate, to show dominance. This place was designed to inspire. He stood just inside the entrance, water dripping from his coat onto the polished concrete floor. feeling like an intruder in a sanctuary. A young woman sat behind a reception desk made of reclaimed wood, smiling as she typed. She looked up, her expression friendly until she saw him. Her eyes widened slightly, recognizing the suit, the posture, the aura of wealth that clung to him like a second skin. But she didn't cower. She stood up, maintaining her composure. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady. "Can I help you? We're actually closed for the day, but Mrs. Vance is still upstairs." Julian swallowed, his throat dry. "I know," he said, his voice sounding rough in the quiet lobby. "I need to see her. It's personal." The receptionist hesitated, her hand hovering over the phone. She was protective. He could see it in the slight tightening of her jaw. She was guarding Elena's peace, just as the employee outside had guarded her reputation. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Julian admitted. "But she'll see me. Tell her it's Julian." The name hung in the air, heavy and loaded. The receptionist's eyes softened with a flicker of recognition. She had heard the name before, likely in the context of the stories Elena never told, but the world knew. She picked up the phone, her eyes never leaving Julian's. "I'll buzz her. Please take a seat." Julian didn't sit. He walked toward the wall where a series of framed photographs were displayed. They weren't professional headshots. They were candid moments. There was Elena laughing with a group of employees, her head thrown back in genuine joy. There were pictures of completed projects, beautiful homes, and designs. And there, in the center, was a smaller frame. It was a drawing, clearly done by a child. It showed a house, a sun, and 3 stick figures holding hands. 2 were small, 1 was tall. The colors were bright, crayon wax still visible on the paper. It was framed in gold, given the same prominence as the company's biggest awards. Julian stared at the drawing, his vision blurring. He reached out, his finger hovering just above the glass, not daring to touch it. This was his legacy. Not the skyscrapers downtown, not the millions in his bank account. This crayon drawing was worth more than everything he owned. He realized then that the decision to come here wasn't just about curiosity. It was about survival. If he didn't try to connect with this world, he would suffocate in the vacuum of his own making. He had traveled hundreds of miles, not just across the map, but across the chasm of his own pride. "Mr. Thorne?" He turned. The receptionist was standing there, her expression unreadable. "She said you can come up. 2nd floor, last door on the left. She's waiting." Julian nodded, a gesture of thanks that felt inadequate. He walked toward the staircase, avoiding the elevator. He needed the climb, the physical exertion to ground himself. Each step felt like a confession. The walls of the stairwell were lined with more photos, chronicles of the company's growth. He saw the early days, the small office, the tired eyes of Elena in the pictures from years ago. He saw the progress, the expansion. He saw the twins in later photos, sitting in the office on weekends, doing homework while their mother worked. They were there. They had been here all along, growing up in the spaces he should have occupied. Reaching the 2nd floor, the hallway was quiet. The hum of the city outside was muffled here. He walked to the last door on the left. It was slightly ajar. Light spilled out into the corridor. He could hear the sound of paper shuffling, the soft click of a pen. He stopped just before the door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was the moment. The investigation was over. The facts were known. Now came the confrontation with the conscience he had been running from for 5 years. He thought about turning back. He could leave a note. He could send a lawyer. It would be easier. It would be safer. But he remembered the drawing on the wall. He remembered the employee saying she taught the children that everyone has their own path. He had to show them that his path could lead back to them. He had to show Elena that he understood the cost of his absence. Julian pushed the door open fully. The office was large, filled with books and plants. Elena stood by the window, looking out at the rain. She had changed out of her blazer, wearing a simple sweater now. She looked tired, but her posture was straight, strong. She didn't turn around immediately. She watched his reflection in the glass. "I wondered when you would find us," she said, her voice calm, devoid of the shock he had expected. Julian stepped into the room, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing them in. "I didn't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Until today. I saw the magazine." Elena turned then. Her eyes were the same, but harder, guarded. There was no warmth in them, but no hatred either. Just a weary acceptance. "You saw the magazine," she repeated, walking around the desk to lean against the front of it, crossing her arms. "And so you came, to see what you missed." I came to understand, Julian said, taking a step forward, then stopping when she didn't move. I needed to know how you did it, how you built all this without me. Elena let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't cruel, just factual. That's the thing, Julian. I didn't build it without you. I built it because of you. Because I had to. Because there was no one else. The words landed with the force of a verdict. Julian flinched, the truth of it stinging more than any accusation. I didn't know about the children, he said, the plea sounding weak even to his own ears. Marcus found the records. They weren't listed. I didn't list them, Elena said softly. I didn't want them to be assets in a negotiation. I didn't want them to be leverage. I wanted them to be free. Free from your world. Free from the expectations. Free from the disappointment of waiting for a father who was always too busy. Julian felt the air leave the room. She had protected them from him. She had seen his obsession with work as a contagion, and she had quarantined their lives to keep them safe. I want to know them, he said, the urgency rising in his chest. I want to try. I know I can't buy back the time, but I want to be there now. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he entered. She saw the gray in his hair, the lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. She saw the emptiness that mirrored her own past struggles. It's not about what you want, Julian, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's about what they need. And they need stability. They need peace. You are a variable. A huge, unpredictable variable. I can be stable, Julian insisted, though he knew how it sounded. I'm changing. Being here, seeing this, it's changed me. Has it? Elena asked, tilting her head. Or is this just another acquisition for you? Another project to fix? Because if you walk out of that door and go back to your life, and only come back when it's convenient, I will not allow it. I would rather they have no father than a father who treats them like a hobby. The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp and clear. There was no negotiation here, no contract to sign. This was human terrain, and he was out of his depth. He realized then that the journey hadn't ended when he arrived in the city. The journey was just beginning. He had to prove he could be present, not just powerful. I'm not going back, Julian said, and he meant it. I don't have a life to go back to. Not anymore. Not without this. Elena studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, filled with the weight of years lost. Finally, she uncrossed her arms. They are asleep, she said quietly. In the room down. The hall. They have a big day tomorrow. School. Julian nodded, understanding the boundary. I won't wake them. Good, Elena said. She walked toward the door, opening it for him. You can stay in the guest house on the property. It's separate. We will talk tomorrow. About rules. About boundaries. About whether you are actually capable of this. Julian walked toward the door, passing her. He stopped for a second, close enough to smell the lavender again. Thank you, he said, for letting me in. Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked at the drawing on her desk, the one he had seen framed downstairs. Don't thank me yet, she said. Tomorrow is the hard part. Tonight, you just rest. Julian stepped out into the hallway, the rain still tapping against the windows. He had crossed the threshold. He had confronted his conscience, and it had found him wanting, but willing. He walked down the hall toward the guest house, the weight on his shoulders lighter than it had been in years, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. He was no longer just a tycoon. He was a father sanctuary of the night. He walked alone, his shoes clicking softly on the stone pathway, the sound swallowed quickly by the lush vegetation on either side. This was not the manicured, sterile landscaping of his own estates, where every hedge was cut to military precision and every tree was placed for maximum visibility. Here, the gardens felt alive. They sprawled with a kind of organized wildness, flowers spilling over stone borders, vines climbing trellises that looked hand-built rather than manufactured. Julian paused under a wrought iron lamp that cast a warm, golden glow on the wet leaves. He ran a hand along the trunk of an old oak tree, its bark rough and textured against his palm. This tree had been here before the house, he realized. She had built around nature, not conquered it. It was a subtle distinction, but it spoke volumes about the woman she had become. In his world, nature was cleared to make way for concrete. Here, concrete was poured to honor the nature that existed. He continued walking, the path leading him away from the main house, toward a smaller structure nestled among the trees. The guest house. It was modest compared to the main residence, yet it radiated a comfort that his penthouse had never possessed. As he approached the porch, a figure emerged from the shadows near the tool shed. It was an older man, wearing a waterproof jacket and holding a lantern. He looked up as Julian approached, his face weathered but kind. "Mr. Thorne?" the man asked, his voice gravelly but warm. "Mrs. Vance said you might be coming down this way. I'm Arthur. I look after the grounds." Julian nodded, extending a hand that felt suddenly clumsy. "Julian." "Yes. She sent me this way." Arthur shook his hand, his grip firm. "Welcome. It's a bit of a walk, but the best way to see the place. She designed the path herself, you know. Wanted every step to feel like a journey home." Julian looked down at the stones under his feet. "It's beautiful, Arthur. All of it. The office, the grounds. It's impressive." Arthur smiled, an expression of genuine pride that didn't belong to him, but reflected onto the owner. "It is. But you should have seen it 5 years ago. Just weeds and mud. No electricity, no water. She bought it when she had nothing but a sketchbook and a loan she wasn't sure she could pay." Julian felt a pang in his chest, sharp and immediate. "She did this? All of this?" "Every brick," Arthur confirmed, lifting the lantern to light the way to the door. "She didn't hire big contractors. Too expensive. She worked alongside us. I remember days she'd be in meetings until midnight, then out here at dawn helping us lay the patio stones. She said if she asked us to do it, she had to be willing to do it too." Julian stood frozen on the porch, the rain misting his face. He thought of his own projects. He signed checks. He approved designs made by others. He never touched the work. He never knew the weight of the materials. Elena had built this empire with her own hands, literally and figuratively. The luxury surrounding him wasn't bought. It was earned. It was sweat and tears solidified into stone and wood. "That's incredible," Julian whispered, the word feeling insufficient. "She's incredible," Arthur corrected gently. He unlocked the door to the guest house and pushed it open. "Make yourself at home. There's coffee in the morning, and Mrs. Vance usually comes down around 8. She likes to talk before the kids wake up." Julian stepped inside. The interior was a revelation. The floors were wide plank wood, worn smooth in places by foot traffic. The walls were painted a soft cream, adorned with framed sketches and photographs of the garden in different seasons. There was no gold leaf, no marble imported from distant quarries, no attempt to scream wealth. Instead, the room whispered quality. A sofa upholstered in durable, soft fabric faced a fireplace where logs were stacked neatly. A bookshelf was filled with well-read books, their spines cracked, suggesting they were actually read rather than displayed. He walked further into the room, running his fingers over the back of a chair. It was solid, sturdy. Everything here was made to last, made to be used. In his home, furniture was often too precious to sit on, too expensive to risk staining. Here, life was invited to happen. He moved to the window, looking out through the trees toward the main house. Lights were on in the upper floor. Bedrooms. His children were sleeping up there. He placed his hand against the glass, the same gesture he had made in his office. But this time the view wasn't of strangers. It was of his own flesh and blood. The silence in the guest house was different from the silence in his penthouse. It wasn't empty, it was peaceful. It held the memory of laughter, of conversations, of life lived. Julian walked to the small kitchenette. There was a bowl of fruit on the counter, apples and oranges, fresh and vibrant. A note was tucked beside it, written in Elena's handwriting. "Welcome. Help yourself. E." He picked up the note, the paper rough under his thumb. He traced the letters of her name. She had every reason to hate him. She had every reason to lock the gates and keep him out. Instead, she gave him shelter. She gave him a chance. The weight of her mercy pressed down on him, heavier than any business failure he had ever endured. He realized then that his wealth was fragile. It depended on markets, on stocks, on the whims of the economy. Her wealth was robust. It depended on her will, her skill, her integrity. No one could take this place from her, because it was part of her. Julian poured a glass of water from the tap and drank it slowly. The water was cool, clean. He walked back to the living area and sat on the sofa. It sank slightly under his weight, accommodating him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the fireplace. He thought about the conversation with Arthur. She worked alongside us. The image of Elena in work clothes, laying stones in the mud while carrying the burden of a new business and 2 children, broke something open inside him. He had imagined her struggling, yes, but he had assumed she had suffered. He hadn't realized she had triumphed. He stood up and walked to the bookshelf, pulling out a random volume. It was a design textbook, filled with notes in the margins. Her handwriting again. Insights, ideas, corrections. She was still learning, still growing. He had stopped growing years ago, satisfied with the plateau he had reached. He put the book back, aligning it carefully. He felt like a tourist in a museum of a life he should have been part of. Every object in this room was a testament to a choice she had made to move forward without him. Julian turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp on in the corner. The room settled into shadows, comfortable and safe. He walked back to the window. The light in the main house upstairs flickered, and then went out. They were asleep. The house settled into darkness, save for the security lights along the path. He was alone, but for the first time in years, the loneliness didn't feel like a void. It felt like a waiting room. He was waiting for the sun to rise. He was waiting for the chance to speak to her again, to speak to them. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and loosened his tie, leaving them on the chair. He wouldn't wear armor tomorrow. He needed to be soft. He needed to be approachable. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. He looked tired, but there was a clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The confusion of the magazine office, the shock of the drive, the pain of the memory, it was all coalescing into a single point of focus. He was here. He was present. He walked to the door and opened it slightly, listening to the night. The sound of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the city that felt miles away. This place was a bubble of reality in a world he had made artificial. He closed the door and locked it, not out of fear, but out of respect for the sanctuary. He walked to the bedroom. The bed was made with simple linens, crisp and clean. He sat on the edge, testing the mattress. It was firm, supportive. Good for sleep, good for rest. Julian lay back, staring at the ceiling. There were no hidden speakers, no smart home systems controlling the lights. Just a simple pull cord. He liked it. He liked the simplicity. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. But sleep did not come easily. His mind raced with scenarios for the morning. What would he say to the twins? How would he introduce himself? Would they reject him? The fear was palpable, a cold knot in his stomach. But beneath the fear was a current of hope, strong and steady. He thought about Elena's words in the office. Tomorrow is the hard part. He knew she was right. Tonight was just the arrival. Tomorrow was the reckoning. He had to prove he wasn't just a visitor in their lives. He had to prove he was a resident. He turned onto his side, pulling the blanket up. The scent of the room was faintly of cedar and lavender. It smelled like peace. He breathed it in, letting it settle in his lungs. For the first time in 5 years, Julian Thorne did not dream of mergers or stock prices. He dreamed of a garden, of stone paths, and of a woman laying bricks in the mud, building a home for children she loved more than herself. And in the dream, he was not watching from afar. He was holding the other end of the jarring beep, no urgent notification flashing on a screen. Just the quiet progression of morning. He lay still for a moment, listening to the birds outside, their songs clear and unburdened. The bed was comfortable, but it was the silence that struck him most. It wasn't the hollow silence of his penthouse, which felt like a vacuum waiting to be filled. This silence was peaceful, saturated with the presence of life nearby. He sat up, rubbing his face, feeling the stubble on his chin. He looked at his hands. They looked the same as they always had, but they felt different. Less like tools for signing contracts and more like instruments capable of holding something fragile. He showered in the small bathroom, the water pressure steady and warm. There were no gold fixtures, no heated mirrors, just clean tiles and simple soap that smelled of eucalyptus. He dressed carefully, avoiding the suit he had worn yesterday. It felt like armor, and he knew he couldn't wear armor today. He chose dark jeans and a simple white shirt, rolling up the sleeves. He wanted to look approachable, human. He wanted to look like someone who could sit on the floor and play, not someone who stood behind a desk. When he stepped out of the guest house, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and cut grass. The property was waking up. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The main house loomed ahead, nestled among the trees, its windows reflecting the rising sun. Julian walked slowly along the path Arthur had shown him last night. Each step felt deliberate. He was crossing from the periphery into the center. He reached the back terrace of the main house, a wide wooden deck overlooking the garden. Elena was already there. She was sitting at a small table, a mug of coffee in her hands, watching the steam rise into the cool air. She wasn't wearing business attire either. She was in soft trousers and a sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked rested, grounded. She didn't look up as he approached, but he knew she was aware of his presence. Her posture didn't tense. She remained perfectly still, a statue of calm in the morning light. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if he should sit or stand. "Good morning," he said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet. Elena turned her head slowly. Her expression was neutral, polite but guarded. There was no spark of recognition, no flicker of the old warmth. "Good morning, Julian. You slept well." "I did," he said, surprised by the truth of it. "Better than I have in years." "That's good," she replied, taking a sip of her coffee. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Sit. We have a little time before the boys wake up." Julian sat, the wood creaking softly under him. He felt exposed. Without the suit, without the office, without the title, he was just a man sitting across from the woman he had hurt. "I wanted to say thank you. For letting me stay. For not turning me away." Elena set her mug down on the saucer with a precise click. "I didn't do it for you," she said, her voice even. "I did it for them. They need to see that conflicts can be handled with dignity. I won't have them learn hatred from me." Julian nodded, absorbing the blow. It was a reminder that everything she did was filtered through the lens of motherhood. He was secondary. "I understand. I want to help. With anything. The business, the house, the children's education. I have resources that could make things easier for you." Elena looked at him, her eyes sharp and clear. "Julian, look around you. Do you see anything that looks like it needs saving?" He looked out at the garden, the well-kept grounds, the solid structure of the house. "No. But I'm their father. It's my responsibility to provide." "You had the chance to provide 5 years ago," Elena said, her tone not angry but factual. "You chose differently, and I chose to survive without you. We are not struggling, Julian. We are thriving. I don't need your money. I don't need your connections. And I certainly don't need you to fix anything here." The rejection was gentle but absolute. It wasn't born of pride, but of proven capability. She had tested herself against the world and won. He realized then that offering money was an insult to her journey. It implied she was still the woman who needed rescue. "I didn't mean to offend," he said quietly. "I just want to contribute." "You can contribute," Elena said, leaning forward slightly. "But not with checks. You contribute with time. You contribute with presence. That is the currency we value here. Can you afford that? Can you afford to put down the phone and just be?" Julian felt the weight of the question. In his world, time was money. Here, time was love. "I can," he said, and he hoped he sounded convincing. "I'm ready to try." "Trying isn't enough," Elena said softly. "You have to succeed. Because if you start something with them, and then you leave again, it will break them. I won't allow that. I would rather they grow up thinking you are dead than thinking you didn't care enough to stay." The threat was clear, delivered with a mother's protective instinct. Julian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "I'm not going to leave," he said. "I know I can't promise you anything based on my past, but I'm not that man anymore. Being here, seeing what you built, it changed something in me." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in his resolve. "We'll see," she said finally. "For now, there are rules. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't buy their affection. You don't undermine my authority. And you follow their lead. If they want space, you give them space. If they want to talk, you listen. You are a guest in their lives, Julian. You have to earn your residency." "I understand," Julian said. He looked at his hands again. "What are their names?" Elena's expression softened, just a fraction. "Leo and Mia. Leo is older by 2 minutes. He's protective. Mia is observant. She notices everything." "Leo and Mia," Julian repeated, testing the names on his tongue. They felt precious. They're beautiful names. "They are," Elena agreed. She checked her watch. "It's time. They'll be down in 5 minutes. Do you want to wait inside or meet them here?" Julian looked at the open door leading into the kitchen. He could hide inside. He could let them come to him. But he remembered Arthur's words about laying stones. You had to do the work yourself. "I'll wait here," he said. "I want them to see me." Elena nodded, standing up. She smoothed her sweater, a gesture of preparation. "Remember," she said, looking him in the eye. "No grand gestures. Just be real." She walked past him toward the door, pausing for a second. "And Julian, don't call them kids. Call them by their names. They are people, not projects." "I will," he promised. She went inside, leaving him alone on the terrace. The sun was fully up now, warming the wood beneath his feet. Julian took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the morning air. He could hear movement inside the house. The sound of footsteps, small and quick. The murmur of voices. His heart began to race, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He clasped his hands together to stop them from shaking. He thought about the drawing he had seen yesterday. The stick figures. He wondered if he was in their drawings now. He wondered if they had ever drawn him. The sliding door opened. Elena stepped out first, holding the hand of a small girl. She had Elena's eyes, dark and intelligent. Behind them walked a boy, rubbing sleep from his eyes, clutching a stuffed animal. They stopped when they saw Julian. The girl hid slightly behind her mother's leg, peeking out. The boy stood his ground, staring with a curiosity that was unguarded. Julian stayed seated, not wanting to loom over them. He smiled, a small, tentative smile. "Good morning," he said softly. Leo looked at his mother, then back at Julian. "Who is that?" he asked, his voice clear. Elena looked down at him, then at Julian. She didn't answer for him. She let the moment hang, giving Julian the space to define himself. This was the test. Not with her, but with them. Julian took a breath. He couldn't say, "I'm your father," yet. That was too heavy, too complicated for a sunny morning. He had to start smaller. "I'm a friend of your mom's," Julian said, keeping his voice gentle. "My name is Julian. I'm visiting for a while." Mia peeked out further. "Do you like gardens?" she asked suddenly. Julian blinked, surprised by the question. I'm learning to," he said honestly. "I think I'd like to know more about them." Leo stepped forward, dropping the stuffed animal on the chair. "Arthur says you stayed in the little house. Are you fixing it?" "No," Julian said. "Just staying." "Okay," Leo said, accepting the answer with the straightforward logic of a child. He climbed onto the chair opposite Julian. "Mom makes pancakes on Saturdays. Do you like pancakes?" "I love pancakes," Julian said, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Good," Leo said. "Because she makes too many anyway." Elena watched from the side, her arms crossed, but her posture was less rigid than before. She saw Julian lean forward, engaging with Leo not as a magnate, but as a man listening to a boy. She saw the way he looked at Mia, with wonder rather than expectation. The cold politeness of their earlier conversation remained, but there was a shift in the air. The wall was still there, but a gate had been opened. Julian looked up and met Elena's eyes. He didn't smile triumphantly. He just finished their breakfast. Leo and Mia, fueled by sugar and the novelty of a guest, excused themselves with the polite efficiency Elena had clearly instilled in them. They ran toward the garden, their laughter trailing behind them like a bright ribbon, disappearing around the corner of the house where the swing set stood. Julian watched them go, his eyes fixed on the spot where they had vanished until long after they were out of sight. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, a physical longing to run after them, to push the swing, to hear that laughter directed at him specifically. But he remained seated, bound by the invisible rules Elena had set down moments before. He was a guest. He was observing. Elena stood up, collecting the plates with a quiet clatter of ceramic. "I'll take these inside," she said, her voice breaking the trance he was in. "Come in when you're ready. We need to talk before they come back for lunch." Julian nodded, standing up slowly. He followed her through the sliding glass doors into the living room. The space was even more inviting than the guest house. Large windows allowed the morning light to flood the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The furniture was arranged for conversation, not for show. A large sectional sofa faced a fireplace that was cold but filled with dried flowers instead of logs. Bookshelves lined one wall, mixed with toys and framed school projects. It was a lived-in space, a heartbeat of a home. Elena placed the plates on the sideboard and turned to face him. She didn't sit. She stood near the window, arms crossed loosely over her chest, her silhouette framed by the garden outside. Julian sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped between his knees. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the questions he was afraid to ask. The warmth of the breakfast scene had cooled, replaced by the gravity of the reality they had to address. The children were innocent, but the history between the adults was complex. "What do they know?" Julian asked finally. His voice was low, barely disturbing the air. He couldn't look at her directly, so he focused on a drawing pinned to the corkboard across the room. It was a picture of a tree with blue leaves. "About me. About who I am." Elena took a slow breath. She didn't move from the window. "They know that you exist," she said calmly. "They know that you are a man who works very far away. They know that we are not together. Julian looked up then, searching her face for any sign of bitterness. There was none. Only a steady, protective resolve. Did you tell them I'm their father? I told them you are the man who helped bring them into the world, Elena corrected gently. But father is a title, Julian. It's not just biology. It's action. It's showing up. I didn't want them to carry the title without the substance. It would have been a constant reminder of what they didn't have. The words landed softly, but they cut deep. Julian felt the sting of truth in them. He had expected her to say she told them he was dead, or that he was a villain. Instead, she had done something far more difficult. She had told them a partial truth to shield them from the pain of abandonment. She had protected them from the disappointment of expecting him and never receiving him. So they don't expect me? Julian asked, his throat tight. No, Elena said. And that was intentional. I didn't want them waiting by the window. I didn't want them asking every night if you were coming. I wanted them to be secure in what they had, which was us. A complete family unit without you. Julian looked down at his hands. He thought about the nights he had spent in hotels, the mornings he had missed, the birthdays he had forgotten. He had assumed that his absence was a void they felt every day. But Elena had filled that void with strength. She had made his absence irrelevant to their happiness. It was a humbling realization. He wasn't the hero of their story who had gone away to fight dragons. He was simply a footnote she had managed to minimize. Was it hard? Julian asked, looking back at her. To keep me away? Elena's expression shifted, a flicker of pain crossing her features before she masked it. It was necessary, she said. Every time I thought about calling you, I thought about the last time we spoke. I thought about you choosing a meeting over us. I couldn't risk them feeling that rejection. I couldn't risk them thinking they weren't important enough to keep you here. So I made you distant. I made you a concept rather than a person. Julian stood up, unable to stay seated. He walked to the bookshelf, running his fingers over the spines of the children's books. Goodnight Moon. The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Books he should have read to them. Books he had missed. I wasn't trying to reject them, he said, his voice rising slightly, desperation creeping in. I was trying to build a future for them. I thought the money would protect them. Money doesn't read bedtime stories, Julian, Elena said, her voice firm but not unkind. Money doesn't hold a hand when there's a thunderstorm. They didn't need a trust fund. They needed a dad. And you weren't available. So I made peace with your absence. And I taught them to make peace with it too. Julian turned to face her. The distance between them felt like miles. I want to change that, he said. I want to be available now. I don't care about the money. I want them to know me. Not the concept. The man. Elena pushed off the window frame and walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the fatigue in her eyes, the years of carrying the load alone. That is what tomorrow is for, she said. But you have to understand, Julian. You are introducing a variable into a stable equation. They are happy. They are secure. If you come in and then leave, if you promise and break it, you destabilize everything. I won't let you be a comet that burns bright and disappears. If you are here, you are here. Permanently. I know, Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the black screen, the device that had ruled his life for 20 years. He thought about the emails waiting, the calls missed, the empire that demanded his attention. He pressed the power button and held it down. The screen went dark. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. No calls. No emails. Just this. Elena watched the gesture. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. She saw the sacrifice in it. For a man like Julian, disconnecting was akin to stopping his heart. Keep it off, she said. At least for today. Let them see you without the distraction. Let them see that they are more important than the business. Julian nodded. He looked around the room again, really seeing it this time. He saw the toys scattered in the corner, the small shoes by the door, the family photos on the mantel. He was standing in the center of a life he had forfeited. The pain of it was acute, a sharp reminder of the cost of his ambition. But beneath the pain was a resolve hardening like steel. He had spent years building skyscrapers that touched the clouds. Now he had to build a foundation on the ground. What do I do? Julian asked, his voice quiet. When they come back in. How do I act? Be normal, Elena said. Don't try to impress them. Don't buy them things. Just listen. If they show you a drawing, look at it. If they tell you a story, listen to the end. They are used to adults who are distracted. Show them you are not. Julian took a deep breath. I can do that. I hope so, Elena said. She walked past him, toward the kitchen. I'm going to start lunch. You can stay in here. Look around. Get to know the space they live in. It might help you understand who they are. She left him alone in the living room. Julian stood there for a moment, the silence wrapping around him again. But it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was waiting. He walked over to the mantel and picked up a framed photo. It was from last Christmas. Elena was in the middle, laughing, with Leo and Mia on either side, their faces smeared with cake. They looked radiant. They looked loved. Julian traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. He wasn't in the picture. He was the empty space on the couch where someone else could have sat. He set the photo down carefully. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden. He could see them playing on the swings, pushing each other higher. They were building memories without him, just as they had for 5 years. But now he was here. He was present. The phone in his pocket was dark. The office was miles away. The only thing that mattered was the space between him and the children. He walked to the corner where the toys were scattered. He saw a building block set, half-constructed. A tower that was missing a piece. Julian knelt down on the rug. It was soft under his knees. He looked around for the missing piece. He found it under the sofa. He picked it up and placed it on the tower, completing the structure. It was a small thing, a trivial thing, but it felt significant. He was fixing something. Not a deal. Not a merger. A toy tower. He stayed kneeling on the floor, listening to the sounds of the house. The hum of the refrigerator. The tick of the clock. The distant laughter of his children. He closed his eyes and let the sounds wash over him. He had spent a lifetime chasing noise, the buzz of the stock market, the ring of the phone. Now he found peace in the quiet. He realized that Elena had not just built a house. She had built a sanctuary. And he had been granted access. It was a privilege he would not take for granted. He stood up as he heard the back door open. The children were coming in. Julian moved away from the toys, standing near the sofa again, trying to look casual, not like he had been intruding on their play. He wanted to be part of the scene, but not the center of it. Not yet. Elena walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She caught his eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She saw him standing there, phone-free, present. Leo ran in first, his hair messy from the wind. "Mom, I went so high," he exclaimed. Mia followed, clutching a dandelion she had picked. "Look," she said, holding it out to Elena. "That's beautiful, Mia," Elena said, taking the flower. She looked at Julian. "Julian was just admiring your tower, Leo." Leo looked at the block structure on the floor. He saw the top piece. "You fixed it," he said, looking at Julian with wide eyes. "It was missing a piece," Julian said, keeping his voice light. "It looked lonely without the top." Leo smiled, a bright, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, it needed the king piece." "I guess I found the king piece," Julian said. Mia walked over to him, holding the dandelion out now. "For you," she said. "So you don't feel lonely either." Julian took the flower, the stem thin and fragile in his large hand. He felt a surge of emotion so strong he had to blink rapidly to clear his vision. "Thank you, Mia," he whispered. "I won't feel lonely anymore." Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, her hand over her mouth for a brief second before she composed herself. She turned back to the counter to hide the tears that had sprung to her eyes. The wall was still there, the boundaries were still set, but the bridge had been crossed. Julian was no longer just a visitor from the past. He was becoming part of the present. The tension in the room had shifted from defensive to hopeful. The dialogue was over. The action had begun. And for the afternoon wore on. Elena had guided the children inside for their rest time, a sacred hour in the household where the noise of play was replaced by the softness of sleep. Julian stood in the kitchen, watching her move around the space with a familiarity that felt both intimate and alien. He had insisted on helping with the dishes, a small gesture that Elena had accepted with a silent nod. The water ran warm over his hands as he scrubbed a plate, the simple act grounding him in a reality he had long avoided. Domesticity had always been delegated to staff in his world, a task to be managed rather than experienced. Here, it was a ritual, a way of caring for the space that held them all. When the last plate was dried and placed in the cupboard, Elena leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on a cloth. The sunlight streaming through the window had shifted, casting long shadows across the tiles. The energy in the room changed. The playful brightness of the morning had settled into a deeper, more contemplative mood. Julian dried his hands and turned to face her, leaning back against the sink. He felt the weight of the question he had been holding back since he arrived. He needed to understand the mechanics of her survival. He needed to know the cost. How? Julian asked, the single word hanging in the air between them. The first year. After we separated. How did you manage? Elena looked down at the cloth in her hands, folding it slowly, methodically. She didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen, where a laptop sat closed. Beside a stack of papers, she opened a drawer and pulled out a worn leather notebook. The cover was cracked, the edges frayed from being handled too many times. She walked back to him and placed it on the table between them. This was the first year, she said softly. Every page is a day. Julian reached out, his fingers hovering over the book before he opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, sketches, budgets, and schedules. But it wasn't just the content that struck him. It was the annotations. Notes in the margins written in the middle of the night. 3 a.m. Fever. Still need to finish draft. Money tight. Skip lunch. Leo cried all night. Work during nap. He turned the pages slowly, each one a testament to a moment of exhaustion he had never witnessed. He saw dates that coincided with his biggest mergers, nights he had celebrated in boardrooms while she was counting coins to buy groceries. I didn't know, Julian whispered, the guilt rising in his throat like bile. If I had known. You wouldn't have come, Elena said, her voice steady but tired. You were exactly where you wanted to be, Julian. I didn't want to pull you away from that. I wanted you to have your victory. I just needed to have mine. Julian looked up at her, seeing the lines around her eyes more clearly now. They weren't just signs of aging. They were maps of stress, of nights spent worrying, of squinting over blueprints in dim light. You did this alone, he said, shaking his head. Every bill, every fear, every sick night. Alone. Not alone, Elena corrected gently. I had them. And I had myself. I learned that I was stronger than I thought. But it wasn't easy. There were nights I sat on the floor of the empty office because I couldn't afford the heating bill yet. I wrapped the children in blankets and told them it was a camping adventure, so they wouldn't be scared. Julian closed his eyes, the image searing into his mind. His children, cold on the floor, while he was likely adjusting the thermostat in a penthouse suite because the air was too dry. The disparity was nauseating. Why didn't you call me? He asked, his voice cracking. I would have sent money. I would have. And that would have fixed the heat, Elena interrupted. But it wouldn't have fixed the loneliness. It wouldn't have fixed the fact that their father wasn't there to hold them while they shivered. I didn't want your charity, Julian. I wanted your partnership. And when that wasn't available, I chose dignity over dependency. She walked to the window, looking out at the garden where the swings stood still. There was a time, about 3 years ago, when the business almost failed. A client backed out last minute. I was staring at payroll, knowing I couldn't meet it. I sat at this table for 3 days without sleeping. I prayed for a miracle. She turned back to him, her eyes glistening. And then an offer came in. An anonymous investor wanted to buy a stake in the company. It would have saved us. Julian frowned, confusion mixing with his guilt. An investor? Yes, Elena said. But the terms were restrictive. They wanted control. They wanted to change the vision. I realized that if I took the money, I would be working for someone else again. Just like I worked around your schedule. So I turned it down. Julian stepped forward, a realization dawning on him. I know about that offer, he said quietly. My venture capital arm made that offer. I didn't know it was you. I was looking for promising design firms to acquire. I didn't know. Elena nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. I found out later, when I saw the company name on the contract. You were the anonymous investor. The silence that followed was profound. Julian felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. He had tried to buy her company, unknowingly trying to own the life she had built to escape him. He had tried to solve her problem with money, exactly as she had feared. I would have given it to you, he said desperately. No strings. I would have signed it over to you. Would you? Elena asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. Or would you have thought you were helping, while actually taking away my agency? That was the risk, Julian. That was why I couldn't take it. I had to know I could survive without you. Even without your money. Especially without your money. Julian walked to the table and sat down heavily, the weight of the revelation pressing on his shoulders. He looked at the notebook again. It wasn't just a record of work. It was a declaration of independence. She had fought battles he knew nothing about, won wars he hadn't even seen, and all while protecting their children from the collateral damage. He had thought of himself as the provider, the protector. But looking at her, standing strong in the kitchen of the home she built, he realized she had been the protector all along. She had protected the children from his absence. She had protected herself from his control. I feel, Julian started, searching for the word. I feel insignificant. Elena walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, solid. You're not insignificant, Julian. You're just late. There's a difference. He covered her hand with his, feeling the roughness of her skin, the calluses from work. I want to make it up to you. Not with money. I know that's not what you want. But I want to help. Let me carry something. Let me take a load off. Elena hesitated, then squeezed his hand before pulling away. You can start by understanding that the load is mine. It's my burden and my pride. But you can share the joy. That's what's missing. You can share the laughter, the weekends, the school runs. You can't fix the past, Julian. The sleepless nights are gone. The cold winters are over. What we have now is the summer. Don't try to rewrite the winter. Just enjoy the sun. Julian nodded, tears finally spilling over unchecked. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, acknowledging the pain of the lost time. The summer, he repeated. I can do that. I want to be there for the summer. It's hard work too, Elena warned, her voice softening. Keeping a garden alive in the summer takes water. It takes attention. It's not just resting. I know, Julian said, standing up. He felt lighter somehow. The guilt was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I'm ready to work. Whatever you need. Whatever they need. Elena smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes this time. Then finished putting those chairs away. Dinner prep starts in an hour. Leo likes carrots chopped small. Mia likes them big. Don't mix them up. Julian laughed, a wet, choked sound that turned into a real laugh. Small for Leo. Big for Mia. I won't forget. He moved to the pantry where the vegetables were stored. As he began to chop, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the board filled the kitchen. Elena watched him for a moment, then turned to check on the children. Julian focused on the task, treating the carrots with the same precision he had once reserved for contracts. But this was different. This was nourishment. This was care. He looked at the notebook one last time before closing it. He would remember the winter. He would honor the struggle. But he would live in the summer. The suspense of the future was no longer about whether he would be accepted, but about how well he could learn to tend the garden she had planted. The sun continued to set outside, casting a golden glow over the kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the measured, checking on the children as they woke from their rest. Julian felt a sudden urge to breathe, to step outside the walls that held so many memories of a life he hadn't been part of. He needed air. He needed to see the garden again, not as a landscape designer would, but as a father trying to understand the playground of his children. He slipped out the back door, the cool evening air hitting his face like a gentle reminder of the passing time. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and burnt orange. The garden was alive with the sounds of dusk, crickets beginning their nightly chorus, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. He walked slowly along the stone path, his shoes making no sound on the mossy edges. He didn't want to startle them. He wanted to witness them. He found them near the old oak tree at the far end of the property, where the manicured lawn gave way to a wilder patch of ferns and flowers. Leo and Mia were crouched low to the ground, their heads close together, whispering with the intense secrecy that only children possess. Julian stopped behind the trunk of the tree, hidden from view, and watched. He saw Leo point at something in the grass, his fingers steady and careful. Mia leaned in, her hair falling over her face, her eyes wide with wonder. They were looking at a beetle, its shell iridescent in the fading light, crawling slowly over a fallen leaf. Julian felt a tightness in his throat. They were captivated by a bug. In his world, nature was something to be cleared, paved, or viewed from a height. Here, it was a universe to be explored. He watched Mia gently touch the leaf, not the insect, respecting its space. She looked up at Leo and smiled, a secret sharing of discovery. Julian realized he had never taken the time to look at a beetle. He had walked over thousands of them in his rush to get to meetings, to planes, to deals. He had missed the magic of the small things because he was too busy chasing the big things. He stepped out from behind the tree, the crunch of a twig under his foot announcing his presence. The children looked up, not with fear, but with curiosity. They didn't run to him. nor did they shy away. They simply observed him, weighing his presence in their world. "Did you see the shiny one?" Leo asked, his voice serious. "He has armor." Julian knelt down, ignoring the dampness of the grass seeping into his jeans. He lowered himself to their level, making himself small. "I did," he said softly. "It looks very strong." "It is," Mia said, her eyes never leaving the beetle. "Arthur says beetles can lift heavy things. Much heavier than themselves." Julian looked at her, struck by the analogy. "Is that so?" "Yes," she nodded. "Like Mom. She lifts heavy things too." The comparison hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He looked at Mia, really looked at her, and saw Elena's resilience reflected in her young face. They knew. They knew what their mother carried, even if they didn't know the specifics. They saw the weight she bore and admired her strength. And he? He had been the weight she had to carry alone for so long. "Your mom is very strong," Julian said, his voice thick. "She is the strongest person I know." Leo looked up at him then, his gaze direct and unfiltered. "Were you strong too? When you were away?" Julian hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer was complex. How did he explain strength to a child? How did he explain that his strength had been hollow, built on isolation rather than connection? "I thought I was," Julian admitted. "Honestly. But I think I was wrong. I think I was just lonely." Mia sat back on her heels, brushing grass from her knees. "Lonely is sad," she stated. "Mom says lonely means you need more love." Julian felt a tear slip down his cheek, unchecked. He didn't wipe it away. "Yes," he whispered. "That's exactly what it means." Leo reached out and patted Julian's arm, a clumsy but genuine gesture of comfort. "You can have some of ours," he said. "We have lots. Mom makes sure of it." The offer was so simple, so pure, that Julian felt his breath catch. They were offering him love from a cup they had filled themselves, despite his absence. They weren't hoarding it, they were sharing it. It was a grace he didn't deserve, but one he desperately needed. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice trembling. "I would like that very much." "Come see our fort," Mia said, standing up and grabbing his hand. Her grip was small but firm. She pulled him toward the base of the oak tree. There, nestled among the roots, was a small enclosure made of woven branches and lined with old cushions that had seen better days. It was a castle built from scraps, a palace made of love. "We built it," Leo explained, crawling inside and making space for Julian. "It's secret. Only us and Mom know." Julian hesitated at the entrance. It was a sacred space. Inviting him in was a significant trust fall. "Can I come in?" he asked, waiting for permission. Mia nodded. "Yes, but you have to take off your shoes. No dirt inside." Julian laughed softly, a sound of genuine amusement. He slipped off his shoes and socks, folding them neatly beside the entrance, and crawled into the small space. It was tight, smelling of earth and old fabric. The children curled up on either side of him, fitting perfectly into the nooks of the roots. From inside the fort, the world looked different. The sky was framed by branches, the grass looked like a forest. He felt enclosed, protected. "What do you do in here?" Julian asked, keeping his voice low to match the sanctuary's atmosphere. "We talk," Mia said, resting her head against his arm. The contact was electric, sending a surge of warmth through his entire body. "We tell secrets." "Like what?" Julian asked, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. "Like, I want to be a gardener," Leo whispered, "so I can make flowers grow for Mom. And I want to be a teacher," Mia added, "so I can tell stories." Julian looked at them, his heart aching with a mixture of pride and sorrow. They had dreams. They had aspirations. And he had not been there to hear them form. He had missed the moments where these ideas sparked. "Those are wonderful dreams," he said. "Your mom would be very proud." "She knows," Leo said confidently. "We tell her everything." Julian nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm glad you tell her. She needs to know." "What about you?" Mia asked, looking up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "What do you want to be?" The question stopped him. Who was he? For years, he had been a CEO, a tycoon, a businessman. Those titles felt like costumes now, ill-fitting and heavy. Inside this fort, surrounded by the scent of earth and the warmth of his children, those titles meant nothing. I want to be a dad," Julian said, the words feeling foreign but right on his tongue. "If that's okay." Leo thought about this for a moment, serious as a judge. "Okay," he decided. "But you have to practice." "Practice?" Julian asked, smiling despite the moisture in his eyes. Yes, Mia said. Like riding a bike. You fall down sometimes. But you get back up. Julian looked at his hands, resting on his knees. They were shaking slightly. I'm ready to practice, he said. I hope you'll teach me. We will, Leo promised. But you have to listen. Mom says listening is the most important part. I will listen, Julian vowed. I promise. They sat in silence for a while, the three of them tucked away in the roots of the old tree. The sun had almost set, the light turning deep blue. Julian could feel the weight of the day settling on him, but it wasn't the heavy burden of business. It was the good tiredness of physical work and emotional honesty. He felt Mia's breathing slow down against his arm, her body relaxing into the safety of the moment. Leo leaned against his other side, his head drooping. Julian didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, acting as a pillar for them. He realized that this was what he had missed. Not the graduations or the big holidays, but these quiet, unrecorded moments. The secrets shared in a fort. The weight of a sleeping child. The trust of a hand held in the dark. He had missed the texture of life. He heard a soft footstep on the grass outside the fort. He looked up to see Elena standing there, silhouetted against the twilight. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was soft, her arms wrapped around herself. She had seen them. She had seen him inside their sanctuary. She didn't call them out. She didn't rush them. She just watched, acknowledging the bond that was forming in the shadows. Julian met her gaze over the heads of the sleeping children. He didn't speak. He just nodded, a silent communication passing between them. I see them. I see what I missed. I see what you did. Elena nodded back, a slight tilt of her head. I know. Be careful with them. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving them in the dim light. Julian looked back down at Leo and Mia. They were asleep now, their faces peaceful in the twilight. He carefully shifted, preparing to lift them, to carry them back. To the warmth of the house. He slid one arm under Leo and the other under Mia. They were heavier than he expected, solid and real. He stood up slowly, balancing their weight against his chest. He walked back toward the house, the grass cool under his bare feet. Each step felt like a commitment. He was carrying his future in his arms. The weight was significant, but for the first time in his life, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an anchor. It kept him grounded. It kept him from floating away into the cold emptiness of his old life. As he reached the back porch, he paused, looking back at the garden. The fort was hidden in the shadows now, invisible to the casual eye. But he knew it was there. He knew that tomorrow they might build something else, or forget about it for a while. But today it had been their meeting place. It had been the bridge. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped into the warm light of the kitchen. Elena was waiting, a blanket already in her hands. She didn't take them from him immediately. She let him carry them to the sofa, let him lay them down gently, tucking the blanket around their small bodies. He lingered for a moment, brushing a stray hair from Mia's forehead. Thank you, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. For what? Julian asked, straightening up. For listening, she said. They told me you promised to practice. Julian looked at her, the exhaustion evident in his face, but his eyes clear. I intend to keep that promise. Good, Elena said, turning off the main light, leaving only the soft glow of the stove hood. Dinner is ready. Let's eat before it gets cold. Julian followed her to the table, the silence between them comfortable now. The suspense of the confrontation had faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of a family evening. He sat down, looking at the plate of food she had prepared. It was simple, wholesome. He picked up his fork, his hand steady. He was hungry, not just for food, but for this. For the normalcy. For the chance to wake up tomorrow and practice again. The garden outside was dark, but inside, the light was warm, and he had walked earlier now felt different. Before, he was a stranger navigating unknown terrain. Now, he was a man walking between two worlds, carrying the weight of both. The guest house door clicked shut behind him, sealing him in the quiet solitude he had once coveted. He turned on the small lamp in the corner, the light casting a soft glow over the simple furniture. It was comfortable, but it was temporary. He knew that tomorrow he would have to leave this sanctuary and return to the main house, to the children, to the reality of his new role. He sat on the edge of the bed, loosening the collar of his shirt. The silence here was familiar, the same silence that had filled his penthouse for years. But tonight, it felt different. Before, the silence was empty, a vacuum waiting to be filled by noise and distraction. Now the silence was full. It was filled with the echoes of Leo's laughter, the weight of Mia's head on his arm, the scent of Elena's cooking. The quiet wasn't absence, it was peace. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, staring at the floorboards. He tried to reconcile the man who sat here with the man who had signed the merger deal 5 years ago. They seemed like different species. One valued power above all else. The other valued a carrot chopped small. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. His phone, still in his pocket, began to buzz. The vibration was aggressive, insistent, like a heartbeat racing out of control. Julian stared at the pocket, feeling a jolt of anxiety ripple through him. It was a reflex honed over decades. The phone rang, he answered. That was the law of his universe. He reached in and pulled it out. The screen lit up the dark room, blindingly bright. Marcus, his assistant. The connection to the empire he had built. He hesitated. His thumb hovered over the green icon. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. But habit was a heavy chain. He swiped to answer and put the phone to his ear. Julian Thorne, he said, his voice automatic. Sir, Marcus's voice was crisp, urgent. I'm sorry to call so late, but the Tokyo deal is moving faster than expected. They need your signature on the amendment by morning. Also, the board is asking about your whereabouts. You missed the morning briefing. They're concerned. Julian closed his eyes. The words washed over him, meaningless symbols. Tokyo. Amendment. Board. Concerned. A week ago, this call would have sent his adrenaline spiking. He would have been pacing the room, dictating terms, solving problems. Now he felt nothing but a distant weariness. Marcus, Julian said, his voice low. Send the amendment to my email. I'll look at it. Sir, with respect, you need to be here. The shareholders are getting restless. There are rumors about your stability. They need to see you in the office. Julian stood up and walked to the window. He looked out toward the main house. The lights were off now, save for a single lamp on the upper floor. Elena's room. She was awake. He could imagine her reading, or perhaps just sitting in the quiet, guarding the sleep of their children. Let them rumor, Julian said, surprising himself. I'm not coming back to the office tomorrow, Marcus. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Sir? The quarterly review is... Reschedule it, Julian interrupted. Tell them I'm handling a personal matter. A critical acquisition. Acquisition. Marcus sounded confused. Which company? Julian.